They say the past is buried beneath glass and concrete. But what if it still breathes beneath the floor you live on? What if every time the elevator hums, it's not just moving through space, but through memory? Welcome to Ghosts of Asia, where urban legends and forgotten truths collide in the quiet corridors of everyday life. Tonight, we invite you into a tale that slips between reality and nightmare. A story whispered through wires, reflected in mirrors, and stitched in red thread. This is the story of a building that should have been clean, new, safe. A place built high above the city and far from its shame. But some floors can't be skipped, no matter how you number them. Some stories wait behind metal doors, silent at 3:07 a.m., for someone to press the wrong button. And when they do, the past answers. This is The Seventh Button, a haunting rooted in hidden history, sealed rituals, and souls too long ignored. Listen closely. The elevator is coming.
It was already past midnight when Ji-yeon stepped out of the taxi. The Seoul sky was heavy with winter haze, diffusing the pale glow of street lamps into a kind of quiet gloom. The newly constructed apartment complex loomed above her, its glass exterior slick with condensation, its rows of windows blinking with sparse signs of life. It looked modern, pristine, and hollow. She pulled her coat tighter and adjusted the strap of her overstuffed backpack. A sudden gust of wind brushed past her ears, carrying with it the distant hum of traffic, and something else, a sound so faint she almost mistook it for her imagination. A soft, high-pitched whimper, like a baby crying. Then it was gone. The building's automatic doors hissed open. Ji-yeon stepped into the bright, over-sterilized lobby. Everything smelled like fresh paint and cleaning chemicals, an artificial freshness that clung too hard. The security guard at the front desk didn't look up from his phone. A camera above the elevator turned silently to follow her as she walked across the marble floor. She hit the button. The elevator arrived with a ding and a gust of cold air. She stepped inside, scanning the panel. Her unit was on the 12th floor. She pressed 12, then paused. The numbers were arranged vertically. 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 8, 12. Her brow furrowed. There was no 4, not unusual considering tetraphobia in Korean buildings, but there was also no 7. Between 6 and 8, there was only a smooth, blank square of stainless steel, unmarked, unlit. She reached out and tapped it. Nothing. A brief chill passed over her skin. She dismissed it as tiredness. Ji-yeon leaned back, eyes half closed as the elevator began to rise. Soft, artificial music played overhead, something generic, a lullaby in disguise. When the elevator stopped, she stepped into the hallway. White walls, polished tile, stillness. Her unit, 1203, was at the far end. She passed empty apartment doors. Not a sound came from any of them. It struck her how quiet the building was. Too quiet for a complex with over 200 units. Her steps echoed faintly. As she keyed into her apartment, she heard it again, that faint, almost inaudible whimper. She turned sharply. Nothing. No one in the hallway. She went inside, locked the door, and sank to the floor, exhausted. The breakup had taken more from her than she'd admitted. This move was supposed to be a reset, a new semester, a new place, a new self. But the silence felt heavier than she expected. That night, Ji-yeon couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling. The ticking of her small desk clock felt louder than usual. A draft whispered through the crack under her bedroom door, though all windows were closed. Then, at exactly 3:07 a.m., her ceiling light flickered once. Then again. And then she heard it. A soft creak. The sound of an elevator moving. She sat up. The hum was unmistakable, distant but clear. The elevator was operating, which was strange because she hadn't heard a single person in the building all day, let alone at this hour. She pressed her ear to the wall. The faintest sound reached her. A baby, crying. Her breath caught. Ji-yeon told herself she was just tired. It was probably someone moving in, maybe a single parent, maybe a TV left on. Anything but the creeping chill that now settled in her spine. She turned on her desk lamp, picked up her phone, and began scrolling. Anything to drown out the noise. Eventually, the crying stopped. The elevator fell silent. She fell asleep at dawn. The next day, she met her neighbor. A woman in her 70s, bent-backed and quiet, was sweeping the hallway outside 1201. Her hair was silver, tied neatly, her eyes observant. "You just moved in?" the woman asked. "Yes," Ji-yeon said politely. "Last night. I'm in 1203. The woman gave a tight smile. "Don't stay up too late." Ji-yeon tilted her head. "Excuse me?" "Young people, you keep strange hours, but some hours are not meant for walking around." She paused, then added quietly, "Especially not near the elevator." Ji-yeon blinked. "Why?" The woman looked at her for a long moment, then said, "There are floors better left unvisited," before shuffling back inside her apartment and closing the door. Ji-yeon stood alone in the hallway, the words sitting like ice on her skin. That evening, curiosity got the better of her. She returned from the library just after midnight. The building was silent. She stood in front of the elevator and stared at the panel again. There it was. 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, blank. 8, 9, 10. She reached out and hovered her finger over the blank button. A ridiculous thought struck her. What if it lights up at 3:07 a.m.? She shook it off. Still, something compelled her. She pulled out her phone and set an alarm, just in case. Then she went to bed. She didn't sleep. Instead, she watched the clock. 2:45, 2:56, 2:03, 2:06, 2:07. Her alarm buzzed. She slipped out of bed and stepped into the hallway, barefoot. The building was silent. She pressed the call button. The elevator doors opened. Empty. She stepped in. The panel glowed dimly. 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, blank, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And suddenly, she saw it. For just 1 second, not before, not after, the blank button was lit. Red. She reached out, touched it. It clicked under her finger. The red glow brightened. The elevator began to move. Not upward, not downward, just somewhere else. The music stopped. The lights dimmed. The air turned cold. Her reflection in the elevator doors seemed slower than her movements, lagging, distorted. Then the elevator shuddered to a stop. The doors opened, and she saw it. A hallway, pitch black except for a dim, flickering light overhead. Walls lined with mirrors, some cracked, some dusty. Red strings hung from the ceiling like veins. The smell of antiseptic and rot filled the air. the sound of a baby crying, closer, clearer now. She didn't move, couldn't move. A shape moved at the end of the hallway. A woman, pale, gown soaked in blood, holding something in her arms, whispering something that sounded like a name or a curse. Jiyeon slammed the closed door button. Nothing happened. The woman began walking. The mirrors reflected nothing but Jiyeon. And then the doors slammed shut. The elevator dropped suddenly like a free fall, then stopped on its own at the lobby. The doors opened with a gentle chime, as if nothing had happened. Jiyeon stumbled out, breathless. The security guard was gone. The lobby was empty. She ran back to her room, locked the door, and curled up on the floor. Her phone buzzed. A voicemail. Unknown number. She played it. Static. Then, a woman's voice, whispering, "You saw us. Don't forget us." Click. Jiyeon stared at the screen, trembling. She looked at the time the voicemail was received. 3:07 a.m.
The next morning, Ji-hyun sat at her desk, trying to convince herself it had been a dream. A very vivid, very unsettling dream. She hadn't told anyone. What could she even say? That she took a ghost elevator to a floor that didn't exist? That she saw mirrors showing nothing, and a crying baby and a dark hallway tied in red string? No. That kind of story didn't sound like the start of a new life. It sounded like the beginning of a breakdown. She rubbed her eyes and turned her attention to her thesis notes. Lines of text blurred on the screen. Nothing made sense. Her body was present, but her mind was stuck in that moment when the elevator doors opened and darkness spilled in like water from a cracked pipe. Her phone buzzed. A new message. Unknown number. You saw her. She sees you too. Ji-hyun's breath caught in her throat. She stared at the screen, hands suddenly cold. Before she could respond, the message disappeared. The number no longer existed in her call history. She scrolled to the voicemail from the night before. It was still there. She played it again, and this time she listened closely. At first, just static. Then the whisper returned. You saw us. Don't forget us. Then another sound emerged beneath the voice. A faint, rhythmic thudding, like something hitting metal, like fists pounding on an elevator door. She turned the phone off and shoved it under a pile of books. That night, she stayed on campus late, trying to drown her thoughts in research. But no amount of academic distraction could erase the image of the hallway, the red string, the mirrors, and the sound of that baby. Her phone buzzed. A new voicemail. She didn't dare listen. Instead, she stepped backward into the elevator and slammed the closed door button over and over. The doors refused to close. A sound emerged from the far end of the hallway, a low shuffle, dragging feet across linoleum. A whisper followed. Ji-hyun. Her name, spoken in a voice she didn't recognize. The hallway grew darker. She pressed all the floor buttons at once, her fingers shaking. Finally, with a shriek of metal, the doors slammed shut. The elevator lurched upward. The panel lit up again. 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 8, 9. No 7. Just blank space. The elevator dinged at floor 12. When the doors opened, she ran. She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she downloaded the security camera footage from her hallway. She had installed a small smart cam outside her apartment door when she first moved in. She pulled up the timeline for 3:07 a.m. She scrubbed through it. There she was, stepping into the elevator. And then, nothing. She never came out. For the next 10 minutes, the camera showed only the closed elevator doors. Then, static. The footage glitched. Black lines ran across the screen. When it cleared, Ji-hyun was standing in front of her door again, fumbling for her keys. But something was off. Her reflection in the apartment window behind her was facing the wrong way. In the video, her body turned left to unlock the door, but her reflection turned right. She stared at the footage, paused it, rewound, watched it again. She was not alone in that elevator. Something had followed her back. At sunrise, she called the building's front office. "Hi, I had a question about the elevator." "What about it?" "There's no 7th floor, right?" A pause. "Correct. Most residents prefer it that way. Bad luck." "But there was ever one, like maybe during construction? Maybe it was sealed off?" Another pause. "Ma'am, there was never a 7th floor. We skipped it during design. You won't find it on any blueprint." "What about during construction?" Silence. Then the voice replied more curtly. "I'm not authorized to discuss structural plans. Is there anything else?" Ji-hyun hung up. She needed answers, and she knew someone who might be able to help her. Tae-woo, a fellow graduate student she'd known from undergrad, quiet, observant, with a fascination for urban legends and architectural anomalies. They hadn't spoken in over a year, not since he dropped out abruptly and moved to the countryside. But when she called, he answered on the first ring. "Ji-hyun. Hey, sorry, it's been a while." There was a long pause. Then he said quietly, "Is this about the building?" Her breath caught. "You lived there too, didn't you?" "Yes," he said, "for 6 months, until my sister disappeared." Ji-hyun gripped the phone tighter. "You mean she moved out?" "No," Tae-woo said. "She vanished in the elevator at night." He paused. She pressed the 7th button. "But there is no—" "I know," he said. "That's the problem." He lowered his voice. "I've never told anyone, but before she vanished, she was getting messages, voicemails, whispers. One night, I watched her step into the elevator at 3:07. She waved at the camera. Then the footage glitched. She was gone." Ji-hyun whispered, "That happened to me." Tae-woo didn't respond right away. Finally, he said, "I'll come to Seoul." That night, Ji-hyun slept with the lights on. She left the elevator alone. She took the stairs. And still, as she reached her apartment door, she heard the sound. A baby crying, muffled, somewhere close. Too close. She pressed her ear against the wall. The sound came from inside the elevator shaft. Not just crying, knocking. 3 slow, deliberate knocks against the metal wall. Then silence. Then, behind her, a voice whispered, push the button again. She turned. No one there. The hallway was empty. But when she looked back at her door, someone had tied a length of red thread around the handle.
Ji-hyun didn't speak to anyone the next morning. She didn't return to campus, didn't check her messages, didn't dare go near the elevator. She sat on the floor of her apartment, red thread still wrapped around her doorknob like a warning. Her hands trembled as she turned it over in her fingers. The knot was tight, intricate, not something a child would tie. It looked ceremonial, almost intentional. Her mind returned to the hallway, to the woman in the blood-soaked gown, to the whisper that said her name. She hadn't told anyone the full truth, not even Taewoo. And yet, someone, something, was already calling her back. That afternoon, Taewoo arrived. He looked thinner than she remembered. Dark circles hollowed his eyes, and a long scar traced the side of his jaw. He didn't comment on how pale she looked, didn't ask why she double-locked the door behind them. When he saw the thread in her hands, he simply said, "It's begun again." Ji-hyun asked the question she'd been dreading. "What happened to your sister?" Taewoo didn't speak for a long moment. Then, "She moved in 3 years ago. Same building, different unit. She was bright, happy, but something about the place, it changed her. She'd wake up crying, sleepwalk. She started talking about things she'd never seen. Red string hanging from the ceiling, women whispering through the vents, a hallway with no lights but full of mirrors." Ji-hyun's skin prickled. "She told me the elevator was wrong, that sometimes it would take her somewhere else. At first I thought it was stress. I even took her to see a doctor. But the footage..." He pulled out an old phone and opened a saved video. Security camera footage, dated, grainy. It showed a young woman stepping into the elevator. She looked back once and smiled, waved at the camera. Then, the screen glitched. A burst of static, and when the image returned, she was gone. Ji-hyun whispered, "The same thing happened to me." Taewoo nodded. "I watched it again and again, frame by frame. 1 second she's there, the next. The panel lights up, and a red 7 glows where nothing should be. The elevator descends. Then, nothing. The building claimed she ran away. The police dismissed it as mental health." "But you never believed that," Ji-hyun said. "No," he replied, "because 2 other people disappeared the same week. All of them had reported strange activity in the elevator. One left a voicemail before she vanished, screaming, said someone was behind the mirror." Ji-hyun shivered. "Did anyone investigate the history of this place?" Taewoo's expression darkened. "I did." They went to a small cafe across the street, somewhere public, bright, away from the building. Taewoo opened his laptop and pulled up a map of the neighborhood. Then he overlaid it with a historical archive. The apartment complex now stood over what was once a government-funded women's sanitarium. It had operated in secret during the 1960s, officially labeled a wellness facility for women with delicate mental conditions. In reality, it was a holding ward for unwed pregnant women, runaways, girls from religious families, victims of assault. Shameful cases, as the records put it. They were sent there quietly, and most never came out. Ji-hyun read the report, hands shaking. It wasn't just a hospital. It was a place to erase people. Girls were brought here to deliver children that would be taken from them immediately, or worse. Some died during childbirth. Others took their own lives. And floor 7? Tae-woo flipped to a scanned blueprint. It showed 12 floors, but there was a gap where the 7th should be. That floor was the labor ward. I found one document that still mentioned it. It was listed as Ward L. I don't know what the L stands for. Love? Lost? Liminal? But something happened there. Something that made them seal it off. Ji-hyun's skin prickled. You think the spirits are still there? I think they never left. And when they built the new tower, they didn't bury the past deep enough. That night, Ji-hyun received a new voicemail. This time, she didn't ignore it. She played it, hands trembling. Static. Then breath. Then a voice, fragile, rasping. Come down. Come down. We remember you. Then the sound of a lullaby. Sung slowly, off key. She dropped the phone. Tae-woo picked it up and replayed the message. His face drained of color. I know that song. My sister used to sing it to herself after the dreams. Together, they returned to the building. Ji-hyun stood in front of the elevator, fists clenched. Tae-woo opened a backpack. Inside, a handheld camcorder, a digital recorder, and a portable EMF meter. You came prepared, she said. I've been waiting for a chance to go back, but never alone. He handed her the recorder. Keep it on always. At exactly 3:07 a.m., the elevator arrived. They stepped in. This time, both their reflections moved correctly, for now. The panel lit up. Ji-hyun reached toward the blank button. Red light flared under her finger. She pressed it. The elevator began to move, but not normally. The hum grew lower. The light dimmed, and a cold wind began to swirl around them, as if the air itself recoiled from where they were going. Tae-woo filmed the panel as the number 7 appeared, burning red. Then, the elevator stopped. The doors opened. And once again, there was that hallway. Long, mirror-lined, draped in red thread. The air was colder than before. The smell, rot and antiseptic. Ji-hyun took a step out. Tae-woo followed, camcorder steady. They moved slowly, the mirror on either side warping their reflections. Sometimes the reflections didn't move in sync. Sometimes they showed shadows walking beside them that weren't there. As they moved forward, the red thread began to tangle around their feet. Tae-woo murmured, "These mirrors, they're not showing us, they're showing what used to be here." And then a voice whispered from the end of the corridor, "Help us." They turned. A door stood half open at the end of the hall. Flickering candlelight spilled from inside. They pushed it open. Inside was a hospital room, or what was left of one, rusting beds, dirty sheets, an altar made of cracked wood and broken glass. Candles burned low. On the walls, photographs, scratched and faded. Women, young, all dressed in hospital gowns, all holding infants. Their faces were blurred, as if rubbed out violently. Ji-hyun approached the wall. A string of Korean characters was carved into the plaster. She traced the letters. "We were never named." Then something shifted behind the altar. A mirror. She stepped closer and saw herself, but not herself. The reflection wore a gown, hair matted, eyes dark, holding a baby. The reflection raised a hand, pressed it to the glass. She screamed and stepped back. Taewoo dropped the camera. Then the candles went out, and the door slammed shut. The room went black. Ji-hyun's breath caught in her throat as she reached out, groping blindly for Taewoo's hand. The air was dense, like walking through heavy fog. She could hear the distant sound of something scraping along the floor, soft, rhythmic, approaching. Taewoo flicked on his flashlight. A narrow cone of light revealed the crumbling altar and broken tiles beneath their feet, but the mirrors that lined the walls no longer reflected anything at all. They were black, empty, as if what lay behind them was deeper than glass. Ji-hyun whispered, "We have to leave." Taewoo didn't argue. They backed toward the hallway, but as they turned, the door they had entered through was gone. Not closed, not locked, just gone. A solid wall now stood where it had been, the same cracked plaster stretching corner to corner. And then something new appeared, slowly etching itself into the wall in front of them, as if an invisible hand carved the letters in real time. "Only the named may leave." Ji-hyun stepped forward, pressing her fingers to the letters. They were warm, fresh, like the wall itself had been wounded. She turned to Taewoo. "We need to find their names." Taewoo nodded, reaching into his bag. "I downloaded the partial patient registry from the sanitarium archives," he said, pulling out a printed stack of aged documents. But most of them were redacted, or erased. Ji-hyun took the papers and held them up to the flashlight. Partial names, birth dates, columns of dashes where surnames should have been. A list of women who had passed through the facility, unacknowledged, unrecorded, discarded. And among them, one stood out. Patient L07. Status, incomplete delivery. Subject, terminated. File closed. Ji-hyun stared at the file. There was no name, just a code. L07. That's the floor. That's the room. Taewoo's eyes widened. It's not Ward L. It's Laboratory 7, maybe even Level 7. She wasn't just a patient. She was the last one. Behind them, the mirrors began to tremble. The glass warped, vibrated, as if something was trying to push through from the other side. A voice echoed from the black glass. "She remembers." The hallway reappeared in a blink, the door snapping back into place as if it had always been there. Without hesitation, they bolted. Back in Ji-hyun's apartment, they slammed the door shut behind them, both gasping for breath. Taewoo dropped the camera onto the floor. Its battery light flickered red, low power. But it had recorded everything, or so they thought. When Ji-hyun connected it to her laptop, the screen went black. The footage refused to play. Then it glitched, and a single frame appeared. A girl in a hospital gown, standing in the mirror behind them. Mouth stitched shut with red thread, eyes open wide, unblinking. Taewoo shut the laptop. She doesn't want to be recorded. Ji-hun stood and walked to her window. Across the dark courtyard, the elevator shaft blinked with faint red light, pulsing like a heartbeat. "We need to find more about that room, L07. There has to be something they didn't erase." Tae-woo nodded. "I know someone who might have access, a retired urban planner. He helped develop the district before it was modernized. If anyone has the original building plans, it's him." The next day, they visited a small studio apartment buried behind an alley of fortune tellers and expired cafes. Mr. Han was in his late 70s, nearly blind but sharp. When they mentioned the building's address, he fell into silence. "Young people shouldn't go digging into what the city meant to bury." Tae-woo replied gently, "We believe something was hidden there, behind the 7th floor, behind the mirrored corridor." Han's milky eyes narrowed. "Mirrors and red string, that was the sign." Ji-hun leaned forward. "What sign?" Han sighed, then shuffled to a cabinet and pulled out a rolled blueprint coated in dust. He unrolled it across the floor, the building's original design. He said there were 13 floors. Officially, only 12 made it to the final records, but during planning, they labeled the 7th floor for demolition, not because of superstition, but because of what was found during excavation. He pointed to a shaded square on the blueprint marked in faded ink, L07, Isolation Ward, No Access. Ji-hun whispered, "Why?" "They uncovered a sub-basement," Han said, "beneath what used to be a ward for unregistered births. The city decided it was better to remove the floor entirely than deal with protest. So they rewired the elevators, sealed the stairwell, rebuilt around it." "But they didn't remove it," Tae-woo murmured. "They just covered it up." Han nodded. "They thought they could erase it. But pain like that, suffering like that, it anchors." He placed a shaking hand over the blueprint, "And now it wants to be remembered." That night, Ji-hun returned to her apartment with the blueprint. She taped it to her wall and stared at it for hours. L07, the room with no number, the floor that officially doesn't exist, the womb of the building's hidden history. She began to dream in flashes, a corridor of mirrors, a girl screaming in labor, a nurse with no eyes, a string tightening around her own throat. She awoke, gasping, drenched in sweat, the scent of antiseptic thick in the air. She turned to the mirror on her wall. There was someone behind her, a woman, pale, drenched in blood, holding a stillborn child wrapped in red string. She spun around, nothing there. She turned back to the mirror, empty. Only her reflection now, eyes wide, hand trembling. But something had changed, written in condensation on the surface of the glass, as if breathed from inside. "Name her." The next evening, Ji-hyun sat in silence with the lights off. No music, no TV, no movement, just stillness. And behind that stillness, the sound. She didn't know when it had started, only that it hadn't stopped. A faint, muffled crying, not loud enough to be clear, not consistent enough to record, but always there, somewhere behind her walls, behind the elevator shaft. It sounded like a baby. And sometimes, not always, but often enough to make her skin crawl, the cry was joined by the soft, gentle hum of a lullaby, sung off-key, as if the voice hadn't sung in decades. Tae-woo arrived just before midnight, bringing with him a sound recorder, 2 thermographic cameras, and a notebook filled with every incomplete file they'd found from the sanitarium. He dropped everything on the table and looked at Ji-hyun, concern etched deep into his face. "You look like you haven't slept in days." She hadn't. "I keep hearing it, behind the wall, same time every night, always at 3:07. Tae-woo set up the recorder by the elevator wall. As he plugged it in, Ji-hyun noticed something new. The wallpaper behind the elevator shaft was starting to peel, not from age or moisture, but in the shape of thin, curling lines, like threads unraveling from the other side. They stared at it together. Then, tap. 3 knocks. Slow. Deliberate. They came from the other side of the wall. Ji-hyun backed away. Tae-woo didn't move. He leaned in and placed his ear to the cold plaster. A long silence. Then he jolted back as a scream erupted from inside. Not loud, but sharp and intimate, like someone yelling directly into his mind. The recorder blinked red. It had captured something. They listened to the playback. Static. Then, a voice. Weak. Croaking. "He never cried. I waited, but he never cried." Ji-hyun covered her mouth. Tae-woo rewound and played it again. "Who is she talking about?" he asked. Ji-hyun whispered, "The baby. She died in childbirth." "No," he said. "Listen again." The voice wasn't angry, it was grieving, desperate, repeating the words like a mantra of guilt. "He waited, but he never cried." "What if the child died before birth?" Ji-hyun said. "Stillborn, and she was left alone." Tae-woo nodded. "Then we're not just dealing with haunted space, we're dealing with unfinished grief." Ji-hyun looked toward the elevator. "And it's trapped." They needed answers, real ones. So they went to the National Archives. It took bribery and a favor from one of Tae-woo's former professors, but they eventually gained access to a restricted file labeled Facility 39, Yongningpo Women's Recovery Unit, 1961 to 1965. Inside were thin, brittle sheets of paper, yellowed by time and water damage. Many of them were unreadable. But one set of pages had survived. A report. It detailed 7 deaths over the course of 1 week in 1964, all on the same floor, all classified as complications during delivery, all recorded with no family, no visitors, no funeral, no names, just numbers, L01 through L07. Ji-hyun's voice cracked as she read aloud. L07, age unknown, status postpartum trauma, infant deceased, subject exhibited violent hallucinations, isolated, silence ordered, room sealed. At the bottom of the file, someone had written in red ink, "Subject refused to stop screaming, said the baby was never born, said the child would be back for her." Tae-woo looked at Ji-hyun. She was locked in there, alone, and she died thinking she'd failed. That night, Ji-hyun didn't sleep again. At exactly 3:07 a.m., the crying returned. Only this time it was louder and closer. It no longer sounded like it was behind the wall. It sounded like it was inside the room. She sat up in bed, heart pounding. The crying stopped. A knock echoed from her bathroom mirror. She turned. On the mirror's surface, something was written in steam, though the room was cold. "Find my name." She and Tae-woo searched records for days. They visited orphanages, archives, churches. Nothing. So many girls lost to the silence of history. So many babies unregistered, unnamed, forgotten. And then, in the basement of a now-defunct adoption center, Ji-hyun found it. A file that had been misfiled. A photograph. 7 women, hospital gowns, blank expressions. One of them was crossed out with red ink, and beside her image, a handwritten note. Yeon Soo-ha, refused to surrender infant. Subject unstable. Transferred to isolation. Tae-woo stared at the photo. That's her. Ji-hyun touched the glass over the image. For a brief moment, she thought it felt pulse, alive. That night, they stood together in Ji-hyun's apartment. The red string was back, tied to her doorknob, but now it led down the hall, trailing toward the elevator. She followed it. At 3:07 a.m., she pressed the blank button. It glowed red. The elevator descended. The hallway of mirrors greeted them again. Familiar now, but colder, more decayed. The mirrors were cracked, some shattered completely. The red string now bled from the ceiling in places, as though it had torn through from the other side. At the end of the hall stood the same door, room L07. Only this time, someone had painted a name across it in what looked like ash and soot. Yeon Soo-ha. They entered. Inside, the altar remained. So did the photographs. But now there was a cradle in the corner of the room, old, wooden, rocking on its own. Ji-hyun stepped forward. Inside the cradle, a bundle of red string, tightly knotted, cradled as if it were a swaddled infant. She picked it up carefully. From beneath the thread, something fell. A rusted hospital ID tag. It read, Soo-ha, 1964, L07. Suddenly, the mirrors around them lit up. One by one, images began to flicker. Not reflections, but memories. Women screaming, nurses ignoring them, births that ended in silence. A mother crawling across a tile floor, blood trailing behind her, reaching for a stillborn child that no one would let her hold. Ji-hyun began to cry. They left her here, alone. The final mirror lit up, and in it, Yeon Soo-ha. No longer screaming, no longer stitched, just watching, waiting. Her mouth moved. No sound came. Ji-hyun stepped closer. Soo-ha raised her hand and touched the mirror. Ji-hyun did the same. And then from inside the mirror, Soo-ha whispered one word. Thank you. The mirror shattered, and with it, the red thread disintegrated into dust. Back in her apartment, the crying stopped. The wallpaper behind the elevator shaft no longer peeled. The knocks never came again. But Ji-hyun knew it wasn't over, because some nights, when she stood in front of the elevator at 3:07 a.m., she could still see the faint outline of a button where there should be none. A 7th button. Waiting. Remembering. The next day, the building felt different. Still cold, still quiet, but not malevolent. For the first time since moving in, Ji-hyun heard the sound of neighbors, muffled footsteps above, the clink of cutlery through the walls, even the distant echo of laughter in the stairwell. Life was bleeding back into the place. It felt real again. And yet, something lingered beneath it. A residue, not of malice, but of unfinished sorrow, as if a spirit had been acknowledged, but not fully released. Tae-woo stayed the night again, despite Ji-hyun's insistence that the haunting had lifted. He didn't say it, but she could see it in his eyes. He didn't believe it was over. Not yet. At 3:07 a.m., they waited together.
The elevator didn't move. No crying came through the wall, no whispers. But in the silence, a new sound emerged. A faint rattling, like beads rolling across tile. They followed it to the hallway. There, placed directly in front of the elevator door, was a small paper box. Inside, a bundle of red string, coiled tightly. And beneath it, an object wrapped in silk. Ji-hyun unwrapped it. A metal needle, curved, old, rust-stained. Ta-woo's face paled. "That's a suture needle." "For stitching," Ji-hyun whispered. They both knew what it meant. Someone wanted something finished. They visited the shaman the next morning. An old woman with milky eyes and a room filled with salt bowls, bells, and smoke. She listened as Ji-hyun explained everything. The elevator, the cries, the 7th floor, the name. When she was finished, the shaman simply said, "You've broken the silence, but you haven't closed the door." Ji-hyun frowned. "We found her name. We acknowledged her." "She was not alone. 7 girls, 7 rooms, 7 deaths. She was the last, but the others, they are still waiting." Ta-woo leaned forward. "What do we do?" The shaman's voice grew thin. "You must finish what they could not, complete the ritual that was stolen from them, and you must do it at the place where they were erased, or the door will open again, not as a whisper, but as a scream." She handed Ji-hyun a booklet, handwritten pages filled with old rites, most in Hangul script so ancient it took them hours to translate. But one thing was clear. 7 names must be spoken, 7 offerings must be made, 7 knots must be tied. Only then would the spirits move on. Only then would the 7th button disappear forever. The problem was they only had one name, Yun So-ha. The rest were ghosts in a ledger, dashes in the census, vanished daughters. They needed to return to floor 7, one final time. That night, Ji-hyun prepared everything. 7 candles, hand-dipped in red wax. 7 knots of red thread soaked in salt water. 7 slips of paper, blank except for one, the name Yun So-ha. The rusted suture needle wrapped in cloth. A bowl of rice, a mirror, and a bell. Ta-woo brought the camera again, though they both suspected it wouldn't work. He also brought something new, his sister's necklace, the only thing they found after she vanished. It had been in the elevator shaft, hanging from a broken nail. They stepped into the elevator at 3:06, waited. At exactly 3:07 a.m., the blank button glowed red. They pressed it. The elevator descended. But this time the ride was different. The lights flickered, not off, but through shapes. Shadows moved behind the glass walls of the elevator. Women in gowns curled on the floor, heads bowed, cradling nothing. The elevator groaned. The air thickened. Ji-hyun felt something wet run down her hand. Blood from her fingertips. She didn't stop it. The elevator doors opened, and the hallway was waiting. But now it was full. Beds lined the walls, 7 of them. Each one held the ghost of a girl, motionless, curled like children. Strings tied to their wrists, leading up to the ceiling. They weren't angry, just sad. Ji-hyun stepped forward and placed the first candle at the foot of the nearest bed. She whispered the only name she knew, Yun So-ha.
A flicker of light. The thread on the girl's wrist dissolved. The bed became empty. They moved to the second. This time, Tawu stepped forward. He placed the candle. He whispered his sister's name. Tae Mi Rae. The air stirred. The second bed emptied. Ji-hyun's voice cracked. That wasn't in the files. Tawu's eyes glistened. I know. They didn't know the rest, but they made up names. Names full of hope, of dignity. Lee Hana, Kim Bo-young, Choi Min-so, Eun Hae-jin, Park So-ri. As each name was spoken, the bed emptied. As each candle lit, the room grew warmer, brighter, lighter. And when the final thread vanished, the mirror on the far wall cleared, showing only the two of them. No spirits, no shadows, just their reflections. Tawu placed his sister's necklace on the altar. Ji-hyun placed the suture needle beside it. Together, they rang the bell once. The mirror shattered, and with it, the hallway collapsed into darkness. They awoke in the elevator, lying on the floor, doors open, morning light pouring into the lobby. The panel was glowing with floor numbers. But something was different. Between 6 and 8, the 7th button was gone. Not blank, not hidden, just gone, as if it had never existed. That night, Ji-hyun slept through 3:07 a.m. for the first time. No crying, no knocks, no dreams, only peace. But just before sunrise, her phone buzzed once. A voicemail. She hesitated, then played it. A woman's voice. Clear, calm. Thank you for remembering us. We are free now. Then, a soft baby cry. But this time, it was not sad. It was full of life.
It had been 3 days since the final ritual. The hallway was quiet. The crying had ceased. The mirrors reflected only what was real. The elevator functioned normally. No glowing buttons, no flickers, no anomalies. For the first time since Ji-hyun moved in, the building felt ordinary. Too ordinary. No messages, no whispers, no red thread. But something still lingered in her chest. A tension, like walking through fog you can't see but feel on your skin. She tried to return to her studies. She sat at her desk, opened her laptop, read the same paragraph a dozen times. Nothing stuck. Her mind kept circling back to the same question. If the 7th floor was sealed, if the girls were released, why did she still feel watched? That night, Tae-woo didn't come by. He had left for his hometown that morning, needing time to process, to grieve, to rest. He'd hugged her tightly before leaving. I think we did it, he said. I think they're gone. Ji-hyun had nodded. But now, alone in the apartment, the silence felt wrong again. Not haunted, just expectant, like something waiting. At 3:07 a.m., she stood in front of the elevator. It didn't move. No lights, no red button. And yet when she leaned in, she saw it. Faint. A handprint pressed against the inside of the elevator door. Too small to be hers, too recent to be old. She stepped back. The metal was cold beneath her fingers. She didn't know why she whispered, "Is someone still there?" But she did, and for just a moment, the panel flickered, and the light above the elevator blinked 7 times. She called the security office the next morning. The guard sounded tired, distracted. "Everything's normal," he said. "No reports, no complaints."
Ji-hyun hesitated. "Has anyone gone missing recently?" He laughed softly. "No one's even moved in. We haven't had a vacancy filled since before you arrived." Her skin tingled. She thought of the footsteps she'd heard, the voices, the sound of laughter in the stairwell. "Wait," she said. "There are people living here. I hear them." There was a pause on the other end. Then, "Ma'am, you're the only resident on the 12th floor. The units above and below are vacant." Click. The line went dead. She pulled up her hallway camera again. There were recordings from the last 3 nights at exactly 3:07 a.m. She scrubbed through the first one. Nothing. The second. Empty hallway. The third, a woman walked past her door. White dress, barefoot, long black hair. She moved slowly, mechanically, dragging something in her hand, a mirror shard. The hallway lights flickered as she passed, but the motion sensor never activated. The camera shouldn't have recorded anything. Ji-hyun leaned closer. The woman in white stopped in front of her door. She raised the mirror, and in its reflection, Ji-hyun's face appeared. But she wasn't at the door. She had been asleep. Hadn't she? The woman in white whispered something to the door before walking out of frame. She turned up the volume. The words were barely audible. "She's still here." Tae-woo hazarded on the second ring. "There's something wrong," Ji-hyun said. "I don't think it's over." He was quiet. Then, "You're not imagining it. I got something too." He sent her a video. Security footage from the subway platform near his home. The timestamp read 3:07 a.m. It showed him standing alone on the platform. But in the reflection on the subway window, a second figure stood beside him. A woman. Same white gown, same dark hair. Eyes locked on him. Mouth stitched shut. They met again the next night. Ji-hyun brought her camera. Tae-woo brought the necklace. They took the elevator down together, not to floor 7, but to floor B2, the old parking level, never used, always locked. Except tonight, the doors opened. The air smelled of wet concrete and rust. They stepped out together. The lights flickered. And then came the sound. A baby's cry, but distorted, wrong, looped, mechanical. It echoed from the dark, and then slowly, mirrors began to slide from the walls, appearing from nowhere, standing upright, unbroken. They showed reflections, but not of Ji-hyun or Tae-woo. They showed the others, the vanished, Mireya, Soha, the girls from the beds, even strangers Ji-hyun had never seen, faces twisted in pain, mouths open in eternal screams. And then, among them, Ji-hyun's reflection. Only she wasn't moving. She stood still in the mirror, mouth bleeding, eyes empty. And behind her, something shifted. A second figure. Unseen, but present. Watching. The baby's cry warped into static. Tae-woo pulled her back. "We need to go." Ji-hyun couldn't move. Her reflection smiled at her, then whispered, "One was never born. One was never named. You opened the door. Now she lives in you." The mirror shattered. Darkness poured out, and everything went still. They awoke in the stairwell. How they got there, neither could say, but Ji-hyun knew what the mirror meant. 7 girls had died, but only 6 had moved on. The 7th, the stillborn, had never been given a name, never breathed, never cried. But now she existed, because someone had remembered her. Someone had spoken her into the world. Ji-hyun had become the vessel. And that meant
She wasn't just haunted, she was changing. Back in her apartment, she found blood on her pillow, a small thread embedded in her gums. Her reflection in the mirror lagged a second behind. She smiled, and it did not. Ji-hyun couldn't sleep anymore, not because of the crying, not because of the whispers, but because of the silence. The kind of silence that pressed against her skin like wet cloth, the kind that listened. She stood in front of the mirror, brushing her teeth with a hand that barely felt like hers. Her reflection mimicked her, but lagged. A delay, a flicker. And then, for just a second, she saw it. A red thread hanging from her molar, thin, wet, leading down her throat like a line sunk into deep water. She blinked. Gone. But her gums still bled. That morning, she found her notebook had changed. Where she'd once scribbled thesis notes were now drawings, charcoal sketches of knotted thread, mirror frames, and distorted babies, curled in strange ritualistic poses. At the bottom of one page, her own handwriting read, "The seventh was never born, but never left. She has no feet. She walks through mirrors." Ji-hyun tore the page out and burned it in the sink, but the same page returned the next morning, and the drawing had moved. Tae-woo returned with books, old ones, stitched spines, handwritten margins, journals from folk practitioners, midwives, shamans. He placed one in front of her, the thread of the dead, and belief older than records, that when a child died before being born, its spirit, unwalked, unnamed, would wander until someone fed it a name, a memory, or a reflection. Once recognized, it could tether to the living, and if not sent away properly, it would begin to unravel them from the inside. You called her into being by naming Seha, by completing the ritual. You gave shape to the silence. Ji-hyun didn't speak. She was staring at her own hands. The lines on her palms were shifting, curling inward, spiraling like thread being wound. The next night, she dreamed of the cradle again. It rocked on its own in the corner of room L07. Only this time, something inside moved. A wet sound, a breath, the sound of tiny nails scratching wood. She approached, legs trembling. Inside the cradle lay a shape wrapped in red string, but this time it pulsed, alive. Ji-hyun leaned in. The string split open, and from within, a face looked up. Her face, but infantile. Eyes open far too wide, mouth sealed shut with thread. It began to cry, but the sound came from behind her. She spun around. All 7 mirrors in the room had turned toward her, and in each reflection, the child was climbing out. She woke to find her apartment filled with red thread. It was tied around every doorknob, every cupboard handle, every faucet, knotted, soaked in something that looked like blood but smelled of salt and vinegar, a preservation mixture. Tae-woo rushed over the moment she called. He inspected the threads carefully. "He's not bindings," he said. "They're offerings." "From who?" she whispered. "From her," he said. "She thinks this is her home now." Ji-hyun stared at the red line stretching across her kitchen. "She's nesting." That afternoon, they visited a spiritual archivist Tae-woo knew, an old man named Mr. Bond who kept scrolls in his basement and incense burning in every corner. After hearing her story, he opened a locked drawer and removed a thin manuscript, The Ritual of the Unborn. In cases where a stillborn spirit tethers itself to a host, the ritual must be inverted.
Instead of naming the spirit, the host must remove the name, erase it from mirrors, unwrite it from paper, sever the thread by blood, and offer a reflection in exchange. Bon looked at Ji-hyun gravely. You must choose a mirror and leave a piece of yourself behind. She didn't let him see the hook shaft, keeping the conversation muted. She still had the books Tae-woo had brought. She paid extra insurance for them all. "What does that mean?" she asked. Bon didn't answer, only turned the page to a hand-drawn sketch of a girl holding her own face like a mask, offering it to a cracked mirror. That night, Ji-hyun lit 7 candles in front of her full-length mirror. She wrote the name Se-ha on paper, folded it 7 times, and placed it in a dish. She pricked her finger and dipped the tip into salt, then thread, then fire. The paper burned slowly, the flame hissing unnaturally. Smoke curled into the shape of a spiral, then dispersed. She stepped toward the mirror, and in the glass she saw herself, but not alone. Behind her stood the baby, now grown, 7 years old, eyes sewn shut, thread coiled around her arms like veins. She reached for Ji-hyun's hand. Ji-hyun reached back. The mirror cracked. Not shattered, cracked, like a door unlocking. For the rest of the night, Ji-hyun was not sure if she was awake or dreaming. She wandered her apartment, every mirror now slightly cracked, every reflection just a little off, sometimes blinking too slow, sometimes not at all, sometimes looking back with pity. The next morning she woke to find her own reflection already waiting, smiling, her mouth still, but the thread tied around her wrist told her it was tightening. The 7th was not done with her. Ji-hyun had stopped using mirrors. She covered them with towels, turned them to the wall, avoided their gaze like old enemies. But still, her reflection found her, in windows, in black screens, in the puddle by the elevator that never dried. Wherever glass gathered, she saw her. The 7th. No longer a baby. Now a girl, maybe 10, face pale and smooth as wax, eyes stitched shut with thread, but somehow always watching. She didn't smile, didn't speak, only stood beside Ji-hyun in every reflection, waiting, not like a ghost, more like a daughter. Tae-woo tried to help. He brought salt, bells, more scrolls. He even tried to move her out, packed her things, found a room in another district. But when they stepped outside the building, the street looped. Every turn brought them back to the same spot, the same manhole cover, the same torn flyer peeling from the pole. Ji-hyun looked up at the windows above. In every glass pane, the girl was there, inside, smiling faintly, waiting for Ji-hyun to come home. That night, Ji-hyun dreamed of giving birth. She was alone in the hospital. No doctors, no nurses. Only red thread strung across the ceiling like veins. Her belly ached, split, opened like paper. She screamed, but no sound came out. She reached down and in her hands a bundle of black hair and stitches. The baby blinked. Not eyes, just thread. It whispered, not with a mouth, but inside her head. You are the last. You are the door. You are the mother. When Ji-hyun woke up, her sheets were soaked in blood. But her body wasn't injured. She hadn't moved all night. only her reflection had. In the bathroom mirror, her stomach was still swollen. She stared at it, flat in real life, rounded in glass. And the girl behind her whispered, "You carried me here." She went to the building's archives. No one at the front desk stopped her. No one was even there. The records room was on B1, a cold concrete floor, old boxes, dust thick enough to write in. She found the construction logs, blueprints, demolition schedules, project notes, and buried deep in a sealed folder, a confession. A document never filed officially. Written by a nurse from the original sanitarium. One girl survived. They thought she had died. She didn't. The baby was born still, but the girl lived. They left her in the sealed ward for 3 days before she stopped screaming. She kept calling for the child, saying she could still feel her, naming her, holding dolls out of bandages, holding nothing, talking to the empty. They called her L07. She called herself the seventh mother. Ji-hyun staggered back. It wasn't the child that was haunting her. It was the mother. The woman who survived the pain, alone, locked away, driven mad by the absence of her child. She never died in the ward. She lived long enough to become the vessel. And now, Ji-hyun was the next, chosen by the thread, chosen by the ritual, chosen to finish what was never allowed. At 3:07 a.m., the elevator opened on its own. Ji-hyun didn't call it, didn't press the button, but the red glow lit the hallway, and inside, the girl stood waiting. Older now, 12 maybe, hair long, dress white, lips still sealed, but her hand extended. Thread dangled from her fingertips like lifelines. Ji-hyun stepped inside. The doors closed. The elevator moved. Not up, not down, but inward. Lights off. No buttons. Only a mirror in front of her. And in it, the seventh mother. Her own face, aged and hollow, eyes wide with grief, a cradle in her arms, empty. The voice came again. Name her, hold her, let her be born. The elevator stopped, but the doors didn't open. Instead, a seam appeared in the mirror, a slit, a mouth sewn shut with red thread. Ji-hyun reached out. Her fingers moved on their own, found the first knot, pulled. One by one, the stitches came loose. The mouth opened, and the mirror screamed. A scream of labor, of pain, of forgotten women and blood on tile floors. Ji-hyun didn't flinch. She whispered the name, Set-byol, Morning Star. Not a name from the files, a name she gave, a name the silence never had. The elevator filled with light, and in the reflection, the girl, now newborn, smiled. Eyes unsewn, whole. Ji-hyun woke in her apartment. The mirror was gone, shattered, dust on the floor, and around her wrist, no thread. She stepped into the hallway. The elevator was working. The panel read 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9,
10, 11, 12. She reached for the 7th button, but it didn't light up. Just pressed, clicked. Ordinary. She didn't press it again. The girl never returned, not in mirrors, not in dreams. But every now and then, when Ji-hyun passed a quiet hallway or stood in front of glass, she saw a cradle, empty, waiting, and she remembered the name. Not for the dead, but for the ones never allowed to live. The ones who stitched their memory into the walls, into the thread, into her.
The mirror in Ji-yoon's apartment had shattered. Not broken, shattered, the way ice splits across a frozen lake. It hadn't fallen, nothing had struck it, and yet she woke to the floor covered in glass, a perfect web of fractures spreading outward from the center, as though something inside had finally broken its way out. She swept the shards into a box and covered the wall with a towel. But all day, the floor kept crunching. No matter how much she cleaned, more glass appeared, dust fine, glittering under her feet, as if the mirror was still bleeding. Tae-woo returned later that afternoon. He brought groceries and a stack of printed photographs. "Security footage," he said, "from the 7th floor." Ji-yoon hesitated. "That floor doesn't exist anymore." "I know, but the camera still recorded." He laid out the images across her table. Frame by frame, they showed the elevator opening, the hallway of mirrors, and in each photo, a girl standing perfectly still in the center of the corridor. White gown, long black hair, bare feet. But it wasn't Ji-yoon, and it wasn't Sayet Buell. Tae-woo pointed to the timestamp. Same time every night, 3:07 a.m. No button pressed, no activity registered, but she appears in the glass, always facing the camera, always closer. Ji-yoon's stomach sank. In the final image, the girl stood inches from the lens. Her face filled the frame, but where her features should have been, there was only a mirror. Perfectly smooth, reflective. No eyes, no nose, no mouth. Only a blank, gleaming surface. That night, Ji-yoon dreamed again. She was standing in front of her bathroom mirror, only this time the room behind her was not her own. It was the ward, room L07. Mirrors lined the walls, but they no longer reflected her. Each one showed a different version of the girl, crying, screaming, smiling, staring. Some with stitched lips, others with hollow sockets, one curled in a fetal position, covered in blood. But all of them watched her. And then the glass rippled. From within the mirror stepped the girl without a face, the one from the photographs. She walked silently toward Ji-yoon and reached out a hand. Where her fingers should have been were strands of threaded silver glass, as fine as hair. She touched Ji-yoon's chest. Whispers filled the room. 100 voices, all hers, all saying the same thing, in unison. You remembered her, but not me. Ji-yoon woke gasping. A shallow cut traced down her collarbone, like a thread pulled tight, then snapped. Blood seeped into her shirt, and across the ceiling, drawn in broken mirror dust, was a single word: look. Tae-woo installed a new mirror for her, small, circular, too small to hold a full reflection. Ji-yoon watched herself brush her teeth, Her face looked pale, sunken, eyes hollow. But her reflection didn't blink. And when Ji-yoon turned her head, her reflection kept looking forward. She dropped the toothbrush. It clattered into the sink. The reflection smiled. They returned to the 7th floor one last time, or at least what had once been the 7th floor. The elevator no longer displayed it, but at 3:07 a.m. the doors opened anyway. A dark hallway. Mirrors still lined the walls, but now they were cracked, some spiderwebbed, some melted, and in the center of each one, a girl. Not one reflection, hundreds. All the same girl, each trapped behind glass, each silently screaming. Taewoo whispered, "She's not just a ghost, she's a memory fragment." "A copy," Ji-yoon said, "stuck in every surface she was ever seen in." They moved slowly down the hall. The reflections followed. Their heads turned in sync. Their eyes wept thread. And then the last mirror began to shake. Glass bulged outward, strained, cracked, and from its surface emerged a hand, smooth, gleaming, mirror-like, not human. The mirror girl stepped forward. Her body was fluid, unstable, her face a silver void. She pointed to Ji-yoon's heart, and from her mouthless face came a voice, clear and sharp, like glass breaking under water. "You made a home for the remembered, but I am the forgotten." She stepped closer. Ji-yoon trembled. "What do you want?" The mirror girl tilted her head, then whispered, "A name." Ji-yoon knelt. Her hands shook. She thought of all the ones who had died unnamed, discarded, hidden. And this one, this broken reflection, was the one who never had a mother, not even in death. Ji-yoon closed her eyes and whispered, "Unche, Grace, I name you." The mirror girl stood still, then blinked. Her silver face rippled, and from the glass features began to form. Eyes, lips, tears, and a smile. The hallway dissolved. Glass turned to water, mirrors to mist, and Ji-yoon was standing in the elevator again, alone. In her hand, a small piece of mirror, now dull, lifeless, and across it, written in dust, "Thank you."
Ji-yoon woke without knowing why. No nightmare, no sound, just a stillness that vibrated beneath her skin, as if the air itself had exhaled and forgotten to breathe back in. She checked the time, 3:06 a.m. Her phone was off, the power was out, and yet from the hallway she heard a soft ding. The sound of the elevator arriving. She sat up slowly, not startled, not even afraid, only expectant, like a ritual, like muscle memory, like something she had always been meant to do. She rose, barefoot, and stepped into the hallway. The lights above flickered dimly, casting shadows long enough to touch both walls. At the end of the corridor, the elevator doors stood open, waiting. Inside, no buttons glowed, no panel buzzed, only the faint reflection of Ji-yoon in the mirrored interior, though she hadn't stepped in yet. She walked forward. Every step felt rehearsed. The moment she entered the elevator, the doors closed without a sound. The lift moved. She didn't press anything. She didn't need to. It already knew. There was no sensation of motion,
No gravity pulling her down or lifting her up. Only that low mechanical hum, constant and endless, like the sound of blood in the ear. The panel was dark. The ceiling light flickered twice, then died. Ji-yeon was alone in the dark. Then came the whisper. Not from outside, from within the metal. 7 stories sealed, 7 mothers silenced, 7 doors closed, and still one remains. The elevator stopped. When the doors opened, she stepped into silence. The floor had changed. No mirrors this time, no red string, only a room, small and square, with walls made of black stone and no ceiling. Above her, only darkness. At the center of the room stood a cradle, carved of wood darker than night, and beside it, a single candle flickered on the floor. Ji-yeon walked toward the cradle. Inside, no child, only a shard of mirror glowing faintly with internal light. She picked it up. In its reflection, she didn't see her face. She saw the 7th mother, older now, tired, but peaceful. And behind her stood 6 other women, hands resting gently on her shoulders. Each of them nodded once, and then they were gone. The mirror in Ji-yeon's hand cracked gently. A breath escaped it, and then it turned cold, dead. The candle beside the cradle went out, but the darkness didn't return. Instead, light began to seep from the walls themselves, glowing faint gold as if some buried sun had begun to rise through stone. Ji-yeon stepped back into the elevator. This time the panel lit up, but not with numbers, only one word: home. She pressed it, and the elevator rose. The hum softened, the floor returned to 12. The doors opened, and for the first time since she moved in, Ji-yeon stepped into her hallway and felt nothing. No gaze behind the glass, no cold spot near the vents, no thread tied to her doorknob. Only her, only now, only peace. The next day, she packed her things. The landlord didn't ask why she was leaving. No one did. The building itself seemed to exhale as she locked the door one final time. She passed the elevator on her way out. Its panel gleamed with fresh polish. She glanced at it. Floor 7 was gone. No blank space, no strange icon, just a clean sequence. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. She smiled. But as she turned to leave, the light above the elevator flashed, once, just once. 3:07 a.m. That night, in a different part of the city, in a building just like hers, a woman entered an elevator after working late. She was tired. She leaned back against the panel. Without noticing, her elbow pressed a small imperfection between floors 6 and 8. A gentle click, a quiet hum, and the button began to glow, red. The doors closed. The descent began. And far beneath the city, a candle flickered back to life. The day Ji-yeon left the apartment, the sun rose through clean windows. No red threads, no cracked mirrors, no names whispered in the steam. For the first time in weeks, her reflection blinked when she did, smiled when she smiled, didn't linger a second too long. She walked out with only one suitcase. Everything else, books, clothes, furniture, she left behind. Not because she couldn't bring them, but but because they belonged to the version of her that stayed in the dark, the one who listened through walls, the one who answered when the elevator called. But peace is never permanent, not when the past has been disturbed, not when the dead have tasted memory. 2 weeks later, Tai Wu called. His voice was tight, quiet, fraying at the edges. "She's back." Ji-hyun didn't speak. He continued, "My sister, Mireille, I saw her, in the glass, same spot as before." Ji-hyun's pulse slowed. "I thought she moved on," she whispered. Tae-woo hesitated. "I think she was only quiet." Then, almost afraid to ask, "Did we ever finish it?" That night, Ji-hyun returned to the building. She hadn't planned to, but her body knew the way. The streets turned beneath her feet like clock hands. The train doors opened at the right platform. The wind followed her like a whisper. When she stepped into the building's lobby, no one was there, but the lights were on, the air was warm, and the elevator was waiting. The moment she stepped inside, the panel flickered. Floor 7 reappeared, no longer hidden, no longer red, just a normal gray button, as if it had always been there. Ji-hyun stared at it, pressed it. The elevator moved. When the doors opened, the hallway had changed. Gone were the mirrors, gone was the red thread, gone were the rows of beds and the scent of old antiseptic. In their place, walls painted cream, soft white lights overhead, and a long corridor lined with doors. Each door had a number, and beneath each number, a name. L01, Park Min-so. L02, Kim Bo-young. L03, Choi Min-so. L04, Eun Hae-jin. L05, Lee Hana. L06, Tae Mi-rae. L07, Yoon Se-ha. 7 rooms, 7 mothers. And the end of the hall, a mirror, alone, uncracked. Ji-hyun walked toward it. Her footsteps didn't echo. The silence wasn't empty. It was held, like breath before a word. When she reached the mirror, it lit from within. Her reflection stared back. No one stood behind her. No girl, no stitched shadows, just her. But something was different. Her eyes. In the reflection they shimmered, threaded with silver. Not glowing, not monstrous, just ancient. She touched the glass, and her reflection whispered, "You opened the door." The lights dimmed. The 7 room doors creaked open behind her, and from each one a soft breeze spilled into the hall. Not cold, not warm, just full of memory. Tae-woo's sister stepped out first. Mireille. Not crying, not broken. She wore white. She smiled. Then came Se-ha and the others, one by one, forming a line behind Ji-hyun. None spoke, but all nodded. Ji-hyun turned to the mirror, and for the first time the face that stared back wasn't hers. It was Se-byung. Eyes unsewn, alive, radiant, smiling. A voice filled the corridor,
We were never buried. We were only waiting. Ji-hyun stepped into the mirror. She awoke in the stairwell, clutching a single piece of red thread. It was warm, still pulsing. She looked around. No lights flickered, no voices called, just silence and peace. But now she understood. It wasn't over. She was the thread now. Ji-hyun didn't go home. Not the new apartment, not the old one. She walked until sunrise, through alleys, past shop fronts, along sidewalks washed in amber streetlight. The thread in her hand stayed warm, soft, like it breathed, like it remembered. She stopped at a small park near the river, sat on a bench facing the water, and listened to the hum of the waking city. Something had changed, not just around her, but within her. Not possession, not haunting, but inheritance. Later that day, she returned to the building, not to stay, not to flee, but to finish. The ritual had broken, then healed, but it had never been seen, never been acknowledged, and the forgotten cannot rest until the living remember aloud. She brought candles, salt, thread, a mirror, and names. 7 names, 7 stories, 7 lives rewritten in the silence between floor 6 and 8. That night, Ji-hyun broke into the public lounge on the 12th floor. It was empty, sterile, never used. She turned off the lights, drew the curtains, placed the mirror on the wall facing the elevator, and began. She lit 7 candles in a circle, placed 1 slip of paper before each with a name written in charcoal. Yoon So-ha, Tae Mi-rae, Lee Hana, Kim Bo-young, Choi Min-so, Eun Hae-jin, Park So-ri. She tied a red thread between each candle, forming a ring of memory. At the center, she sat on her knees, eyes closed, heart open. And for the first time, she spoke their names aloud, not whispered, not in fear, but in honor. As each name was spoken, a breeze circled the room. No wind, just presence. The air shifted, the flames flickered, and the mirror began to reflect more than just the room. In its surface, the hallway appeared, floor 7, clean, lit, restored. The doors opened. The women stepped out, not as ghosts, not as echoes, but as themselves, calm, still, complete. They didn't speak. They didn't have to. They looked at Ji-hyun with something softer than gratitude. Recognition. She had remembered them, named them, lit candles in their absence, made space for them in a world that forgot. The mirror shimmered. One by one, the women turned and walked back into their rooms. The doors closed behind them, but not like prison doors, like rooms in a home. Rooms with beds and names on the door, and no shame written on the walls. When the last candle burned low, Ji-hyun whispered, "I see you. I remember you. You existed." The mirror cracked once, a hairline fracture, like a seal being broken, and in its place, No images returned, only her. Her eyes, her face, her breath. Hold. The next morning, she visited the city records office, requested that a small memorial be added to the digital archives of the district. No faces, no photos, just in memory of the 7 unnamed women who lived and died on floor 7. You were real. You are not forgotten. The clerk raised an eyebrow, but nodded and typed it in. The record became official. The memory became real. Back at the building, Ji-yoon passed the elevator. She glanced at the panel. The button for 7 was still missing, but she no longer felt dread, only something quieter, something like love. That evening, a knock echoed from her apartment door. Not frantic, not spectral, just soft. She opened it. No one was there. Only a photograph on the floor, black and white. A woman in a hospital gown holding a child swaddled in red thread, both of them smiling. On the back, in small handwriting, "You gave us a voice. Now we return it to you." She placed the photo on her desk, and for the first time in months, she began to write. Not about hauntings, not about loss, but about history, about women, about silence turned to song. It had been a year. The apartment was no longer hers. Someone else lived in Unit 1203 now. Ji-hyun had moved on, at least in the way people say they do. She taught again, she wrote, she laughed sometimes. She looked into mirrors and saw herself, no longer trailing threads. But sometimes, late at night, she still checked the time. 3:07 a.m. Always 3:07. The memory of the elevator never left her. She didn't need it to. It wasn't trauma now. It was testimony. There had been ghosts. There had been pain. But there had also been voices returned, names restored, silence broken. And that mattered. Even if no one believed her, even if the building stood, polished and unremarkable, with the 7th floor quietly missing, its absence never questioned, she knew that was enough. Until one evening, when the past knocked. Literally, at her doorstep. A girl stood on her doorstep, young, tired-eyed, clutching her phone like a lifeline. She looked like Ji-hyun once had, overworked, alone, frayed. Her voice shook when she spoke. "I'm sorry, I know you don't know me, but I found your name in the building records. I live in Tower 6 now." Ji-hyun froze. The girl continued. "There's no 7th floor, but last night I pressed something and I think I saw it." Ji-hyun's stomach turned cold. "What did you see?" The girl looked down. "There was a hallway, but it was empty. Only mirrors and a cradle and..." She held out her phone. On the screen, a still from her hallway's security camera. A shape in the elevator, faint, blurred, but unmistakable. A girl. Not a child, not a woman, something in between. And around her neck, a single strand of red thread.
Ji-hyun invited her in, made tea, listened. When the girl asked if it was haunted, if she was cursed, if she should leave, Ji-hyun said no. Then softer, "But you've been noticed." The girl asked what to do, and Ji-hyun gave her the only advice that mattered. Don't be afraid of remembering. That night, Ji-hyun returned to the building one last time. She didn't bring tools, no thread, no candles, only her voice and the truth. The elevator greeted her like an old friend. Quiet hum, soft light, the panel unchanged. She stared at the place where the 7th button had once glowed red. It was blank again. She reached out and pressed it anyway. Nothing happened. Of course. She turned to leave, but just before she stepped out, the doors began to close. On their own. No sound, no warning. And then, a ding, and the elevator began to move. She didn't panic, not this time. She knew where it was taking her. The place between floors, the space memory slips into when no one's watching, the seam between the past and the present. It stopped. The doors opened. The hallway was no longer terrifying. Still, dusty, faded, but quiet in a sacred way, like a shrine. The mirrors were covered now, white sheets hanging over each one, gently swaying in a breeze she couldn't feel. There was no blood, no thread, no cries, only a cradle, bathed in a soft light, sitting at the very end. Inside, no child, just a journal, bound in red ribbon. She opened it. Inside were entries, some hers, some not. Words written in desperate scrawl and neat calligraphy in trembling hands. 100 different voices, all saying the same thing. I was here. I was alive. I remember. Ji-hyun turned to the mirror closest to her. She pulled the sheet away. Her reflection looked back, and in that reflection, all of them stood behind her. Not ghosts, witnesses. The mothers, the daughters, the stillborn, the unnamed, the erased. They didn't need revenge. They needed a record, and Ji-hyun had written it. When she returned to the surface, the building felt different. Not lighter, but settled. Like the breath that had been held for decades had finally been released. She didn't speak to anyone. She didn't need to. History doesn't need applause, only acknowledgement. Years later, a new elevator was installed. Faster, sleeker, digital. No floors skipped, no buttons missing. But sometimes, late at night, it stopped on a floor no one remembered building. And sometimes, it opened to a corridor that wasn't supposed to be there. And sometimes, a girl stepped inside. Tired, alone, looking for something she couldn't name, and the elevator would hum gently and carry her down, not to be haunted, but to remember.